Boston, Massachusetts, one of the true hotbeds of video game development. Which is a bit odd when you think about it, because Boston also happens to be one of the oldest cities in America. Everywhere you go are remnants of Boston's colonial past, its endless statues and historical landmarks. How is it that a place this steeped in history arrived at the forefront of such a new medium? That's what I'm here to find out, and my first step is to separate Boston proper from the greater Boston area. Few, if any, of the region's developers are located in the touristy downtown areas of the city, but a stone's throw across the Charles River is the city of Cambridge, home of Harvard and MIT. I'm here to talk to John Drake from Harmonix, creators of Rock Band and one of the many studios that call this area home. So what's the story behind Harmonix setting up shop in Cambridge, of all places? Because I'm sort of fascinated by Boston as a development scene, because there's a lot of studios out here.
So, I mean, I think that one of the reasons that it works so well, and the reason we're here in the first place, is actually that Alex and Aran, who are our co-founders, were at the MIT Media Lab. Okay. And I think also undergrad, both of them. So, you know, we're literally 6 or 7 blocks away from MIT in Kendall Square. And they just sort of set up shop in an office here, and since then, you know, they've poached a bunch of people who were also at MIT. Okay. I went to school up the street at Harvard, so the biggest thing about Boston is that it's a college town. There's a lot of young talent who's just excited about doing stuff, and before, you know, the past 2 or 3 years, it was kind of hard to get into video games on your own. Now anyone can get a Unity license and start making an iPhone game, but that's kind of new.
So one of the interesting things to me about Boston is that for as many developers as there are out here, there's really no publishers. And I've sort of heard that that leads to a more like open, freewheeling relationship between developers.
Yeah, it's kind of great actually. It means that everyone's got their product cycles. So, you know, like Bioshock Infinite's like a 2-year thing. Rock Band Blitz is like an 8-month project. Yeah. And, you know, we've traded some pretty senior staff back and forth. It means that you get away with things that you don't get away with in, say, San Francisco or, you know, in LA, where people will jump as soon as they don't feel like they want to be on a project anymore, or a company will just lay everyone off. Like, it's a lot more collegiate and familial, even across companies. So us, Turbine, 38, even up in Rhode Island.
So, I mean, how would you describe, like, the Boston development scene as a whole, besides just being, like, friendly with one another? Is there a sort of distinct personality to the studios out here? Is there any sort of, like, defining characteristic, or is it just too nebulous?
I think that people make really different games. So, I mean, like, if we talk about the whole Boston community, there's also a ton of indie devs who you know, do very different stuff, and they're like, sort of pocketed all around. But in terms of those big 4 or 5 studios, I think you do get a lot of like kind of collegiate, sort of silly people who've stuck around here, because like it's kind of crazy that we're in Boston. Like, there are no publishers here to do business with. Every week we're flying somewhere to talk to someone on the West Coast, someone in Seattle, someone in San Francisco, and like, you know, it's kind of a bonkers idea. So because of that, we all get frozen in here for 3 months in the winter, and everyone goes stir crazy during crunch, and then we all meet up and have drinks. And it's pretty rad.
John's taking us down the street to the Middle East, a live music venue that also happens to be a pretty decent place to grab a falafel.
But this is a venue where, like, on a Wednesday night, you'll see like a Harmonix band opening for like a punk band that you loved when you were growing up, opening for like some college band from the street. Like, it's kind of all shapes and sizes, play at different venues in the Middle East, and the bookers are just dudes who play in the Boston music scene, which is kind of awesome.
For a studio like Harmonix, Boston's game development culture and its live music culture are equally important to the company's identity.
So what would you say the significance of the local Boston music scene has been for you guys, like, over the years as you've sort of progressed from game to game?
I think that for us, it's a through line of how everyone knows each other at Harmonix. I think, and this is to your earlier questions about, like, you know, how the industry sort of is different in Boston, that sort of collegiate atmosphere a lot of studios have. Like, you know, we have people in our ops department who, like, you know, work our front desk who are awesome lead singers from bands that were touring 15, 20 years ago. We have producers who, you know, came up in the same scene with some of our designers. And in that respect, it's like, you know, we meet a lot of people just sort of out in Cambridge or in Boston playing shows. And even if they're not video games people, because we have to staff a big studio, they might be really talented musicians or really talented visual artists. And we sort of suck them in and train them up on video games.
That's interesting. So it all just sort of ties together to you guys being sort of tucked away in this smaller, you know, middle market city. Not that Boston's that tiny or anything.
No, I mean,
but you can get away with a lot more out there.
Yeah, I think it's sort of like, you know, it's our cabin in the woods away from the rest of the industry. Right. It's not like it's cloistered and we can't, like, survive. We're not like hunting
Right.
wild boar.
You're
to
not
survive.
the
Yeah.
Unabomber just writing missiles.
No, I'm totally not the Unabomber.
Right.
Did someone tell you that?
No,
I was
no,
the Unabomber?
not me.
I didn't say that. No, I mean, I think it's sort of a little cloister of really creative people who are interested in solving problems the best way and not just the fastest way or the cheapest way. I think it's like, you really see companies out here investing in making really kick-ass games.
If you want to know how closely knit the Boston development community is, consider this. Just a few blocks down the road from Harmonix is Demiurge Studios, an indie developer that got its start helping out bigger studios with their existing projects before recently releasing their own title, Shoot Many Robots. After moving to this area from Pittsburgh, Demiurge initially worked out of the Harmonix office before finding their own studio space, the sort of business equivalent of crashing on your buddy's couch. I'm here to meet Al Reed and find out what it's like running a small studio here in Cambridge.
So, looking at all these developers in the area, what is the relationship like with with Demiurge and the other studios out there in terms of, you guys just talking about your work, talking about what you're doing these days and exchanging ideas?
I think we make a point we're pretty good about showing each other what we're doing. So at that monthly meeting, people will bring in development work. I guess there's two monthly meetings. There's the Boston Postmortem, and then there's a group called Boston Indies.
Yeah.
And at Boston Indies, people bring a laptop and flip it open and show each other what we're doing. We showed folks some really early builds of Shoot Many Robots at that, and you can get really good, honest feedback from other developers, which is rare. I think it's another sort of East Coast thing, is we're not terribly polite, and we tell it how it is. So
Right.
you get a lot of really honest, frank feedback about the quality of your work and what needs to be improved, and that helps make our games quite a lot better.
So, why do you think that this big game development community has sprung up in Boston, yet in other big East Coast cities like New York, Philadelphia, all these other areas, you don't really have that sort of big, vibrant development culture?
I think it's the schools. So we're here in Harvard University, and we're 2 miles from MIT, and the universities here give us a lot of our talent. We hire students from Harvard and MIT at Demiurge, and it's remarkable that we're able to take someone right out of school and drop them at a desk and put them on a project like Shoot Many Robots or whatever we're working on that day, and they're able to be effective. And I think that's at a lot of places you don't get that, but here in Boston, because the universities are so excellent, we're able to do that.
Yeah.
So I think it centers around that. Also, there's just, and these organizations came out of the universities, but there's a lot of really old guard game development in Boston. Zork was made here, right? And you don't have that many other places.
So what's it like for you guys as, a medium-sized developer here in Boston, having a show like PAX East come into town? I imagine it helps. It probably helps spread the spotlight to your local studio.
It does, and I don't have to ship televisions across the country, which is maybe my favorite part.
Right.
But no, it's. I mean, so first of all, we get to help other developers. So I got an email from Mike Wilford, who runs Twisted Pixel, saying, "Do you guys have any extra extension cords?" And we had a guy who, because we have a car, because we live here, was ran out and grabbed a couple extension cords and bring them over to him because it's easy. So that's nice. So it's easier for us, but it gives us a chance to show off the city. So if you go around the PAX show floor, you're going to see all these independent developers like Alchemy Labs and Firehose, and I don't know how to say it, Dejo Band, the guys who make Reckless Disregard for Gravity. I never know how to say it. They're not very good at. They make their games hard to pronounce, but they're fantastic.
Purposely esoteric.
Yeah, well, I said little heavy, right? We're a cerebral group.
The influence of top-level universities is tough to ignore around here. While on the surface they may seem obtuse and maybe a little elitist, their ethos of inspiring students to combine hard work, technology, and creativity has been a breeding ground for game developers since the early 1960s. And now, you have research programs like MIT's Gambit Game Lab, designed to let students explore new ideas in game design that industry professionals can experience as playable games. Few people know how much times have changed better than Steve Golson. If that name doesn't ring a bell, it's probably because Steve left the game industry over 2 decades ago. But in an MIT dormitory in the early 1980s, he and his partner Doug McRae made a hobby of modifying arcade machines, including one project that came to be known as Ms. Pac-Man.
One of the things in video games at that time were enhancement kits or speed up kits that would be sold to the arcade owners. The first one really was for asteroids, and it literally sped up the game because people were playing the game, they'd put their quarter in and they could play forever.
Right, yeah.
Well, Doug and Kevin had 3 Missile Command games. Missile Command, nuclear war, destruction. It was a really big thing at MIT. So they called the various manufacturers that were selling these enhancement kits. Hey, do you have an enhancement kit for Missile Command? Oh, we're working on one. It was a much more sophisticated game than any of the earlier ones. And so it was difficult for people to figure out how to do a quick hack and make it speed it up. So Doug and Kevin, they finally realized, hey, we go to MIT. I bet we could write an enhancement kit for it. And they borrowed money from Doug's mom to buy the microprocessor development system that we needed. And they started in their dining room. I wasn't a software guy, but I knew enough of the hardware to do the hardware development that we need and to help reverse engineer Missile Command. So that's how we got started.
Now, was any of this like officially sanctioned by MIT? Do you know if the staff there had really any idea what you guys were doing?
None at all. They had no idea. I'm sure maybe someone mentioned to a classmate or a professor, but it was just something we were doing totally on our own. I think that's the one thing the professors would have said. They said, you know, you really should finish your degree first before you go off and do. But that, you know, that's a pretty classic story as well. You drop out of school and you go off and make a company.
What is it like for you now seeing MIT have this great game development program?
It's really wonderful. I mean, so to see MIT's really had 3 generations of game developers. The first one goes back to 1961 with Space War. And the Tech Model Railroad people and the beginnings of Project Mac and all that. And then in the early 80s you had General Computer. I think in 1983, 1984, I can't remember which year it was, we hired more MIT grads than any other company. We beat out Hewlett-Packard. And so that was really something. But it was an easy story to get people to work for. So that's early 80s. And now, here we are 30 years later, you have the Gambit at MIT, and you have the much more game companies being spun out and coming out of that. And so there is quite this flourishing, wonderful community of game developers in the Boston area.
In 2010, Boston became the home of PAX East, a spin-off to the annual Penny Arcade Expo in Seattle. For publishers and the media, the biggest video game show of the year is still E3 in Los Angeles. But for the American public, PAX is their biggest gaming show of the year. If you've never been to a video game convention, you might be in for a shock as you step out onto the show floor. There's a sort of electricity pulsing through the show's 70,000 plus attendees, publishers sparing no expense to deliver a spectacle, and fans eagerly awaiting their first chance to play an upcoming game. This type of show is a big draw for the city of Boston, but why here? Does a show about video games really need to be held in the place where video games are made? I talked to Penny Arcade's Robert Koo to find out.
You know, when we were first touring cities, because we knew we were going to do PAX East, we just didn't know where. We had toured Philadelphia, New York, Chicago, all these other cities, and what it came down to, there were 2 parts. One was operationally, you know, what would actually work from a logistical standpoint, with unions and with the building and whether the city could work with us. And 2, probably the most important part was actually whether it was a cultural fit. And Seattle obviously has a really big game dev community, has a really great sort of gaming history behind it. I would say within a day or 2 of touching down in Boston, like you felt it.
And what are your plans for the future of PAX East? Are you guys sticking around Boston? Is this the sort of place where you'd like to set the flag down?
Yeah, we actually just announced a deal a few months ago where Boston will be the home of PAX East for the next 10 years, which is as long as of a commitment I've made to anything, ever.
How much of an impact do you think that's going to have on the development culture out here?
I don't know. I hope it makes a positive impact.
Yeah.
Ideally, when people think of, like, I know that when people think of Seattle, they think of Valve, they think of PAX, they think of Wizards of the Coast, they think of Nintendo, they think of Microsoft, they think of all these great companies out there. I mean, I think that we are merely like a piece of the puzzle to it. And hopefully when people think of Boston, they think of PAX East across a whole other list of really great components to that one big picture.
This is Achiro Lamb. He's here with his studio Dejobon Games to demo a title called, and I kid you not, Drunken Robot Pornography. That name probably tells you everything you need to know about whether Dejobon could be classified as a mainstream developer. Dejobon is a small studio, and a local one, a member of Boston's tightly knit indie developer community dedicated to unique and experimental games. For studios like these, developers with next to no marketing budget, being able to get their games into the spotlight right alongside the biggest publishers in the business is a huge deal.
There's so many people down there on the show floor here at PAX East. I'd imagine that for an indie developer based in Boston, this has got to be a little bit like a tornado just sweeping through town for you guys, but sort of in a good way, right?
A tornado or a nirvana.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine 70,000, 60,000 of your favorite fans and friends and fellow gamers just coming to your hometown to see you.
Do you guys have any sort of relationship with the larger developers here in Boston, or do you guys sort of like keep yourself a little bit more secluded and just, you know, stick to your indie friends?
There's a lot of friendship going both ways. So again, we're all developers, we're all game developers, which means that we all have many of the same, you know, hopes, dreams, problems, and so forth.
Yeah.
So I find AAA developers to be very approachable, and I think they love the idea of independence working, because again, at the end of the day, we're making games.
So one of the things I've heard from some of the bigger developers out there is that they get a lot of their development talent from the big universities out here, like MITs and the Harvards and stuff. As indie developers, what's your guys' connection to those big schools in the Boston area?
Well, I am a Worcester Polytechnic Institute graduate over in Worcester, Massachusetts, you know, about 45 minutes west of here. And these gaming programs that have popped up in universities are producing these very talented students, very capable students. And we have employed many as interns. We are bringing them on board full time once they graduate. So I would say academia in the Boston area has done a tremendous amount to help us create the kind of games that we're trying to create.
If you could put on your genie hat and look into the future, what do you predict for the Boston indie development scene 10, 15 years down the road?
Oh God, I'm biased here, but I'm going to say wonderful things.
Yeah.
Things have become more amazing with every passing year. We have had more very, very bright people exit college. You know, they'll graduate with a degree and they'll be interested in game development, and it's very viable. So what we're seeing is more creativity, more businesses that are financially viable, more small businesses. And I think we'll just continue to see that grow for the next 5, 10, 15 years. Mm-hmm. And what you see now here is the seed of, you know, if I may use a metaphor, the flower that is the Boston game development community in 2020.
By American standards, Boston is an old place, and yet this city's historical legacy has gone a long way towards shaping its identity as a place for making video games. Yes, the streets may be windy and narrow, but that small geographical footprint makes for an intimate community of developers, ones who don't mind their buddies sleeping on the couch for a little while when they roll into town. And the local schools, stodgy and elite some of them may seem, are a fertile ground for developer talent and new ideas in game design. At its heart, Boston is a community of game developers that spends the year enjoying its relative seclusion from the rest of the video game world. And for those 3 days in the spring when PAX East rolls into town, the rest of us get to see what's been happening in this crazy little corner of the country.